Thank you for tuning in to the Scattered Abroad Network and Joint Podcast. I'm Wayne Rogers, and I'll be hosting this episode. I am also the host of the Meet Me at the Mountain podcast. Today we have Daniel Webster, Michael Clark, and Matthew McBrayer with us discussing on this today the topic of gossip. I think gossip, to begin with, fellas, when we start talking about gossip, when we're talking about things, this is obviously something that a lot of times happens behind the scenes. That's kind of setting up what we're talking about. We have spent some time on other episodes talking about things that are going on that will sometimes lead us down this path. We've talked about infighting. We've talked about sometimes arrogance and things that might lead someone down this path. But I think it's good for us to always define some terms. And so when we start talking about gossip, and I'm going to throw it to Matthew McBrayer here and let us kind of begin with a good definition of what gossip really is, and then we'll get into maybe some examples, what that really looks like, and where that sometimes will lead us.
All right, so I'm going to read from a book here.
Your book.
My book. So,
What
sorry.
can I say?
This is not the arrogance podcast.
I was trying not to do that, guys. Okay, so
Just go ahead and
this
tell
is
us where you can get it.
Conformed or Transformed. You can get it on Amazon.
There it is.
There you go.
There you go.
All right.
But we have a chapter on gossip, and I think the etymology of the word really makes some sense. I'm going to read right from it and then kind of go into like a brief definition here. And I'm sure like there's some other things in this chapter that I'm not going to mention, but like everybody else can add to it. But the word gossip is an old Anglo-Saxon word that was comprised of two other words. The first being God, and the second sib. Obviously, we know what God would mean, but sib is the shortened form of sibling, giving the idea of a relative. The word was associated with the denominational mindset of having a baptismal sponsor, a practice not found in the scriptures, usually referred to as a godparent. This idea extended into the idea of someone that you were close to, defined around 1300 AD. This closeness was also related to women who might invite close friends to attend the birth of their child. It is evident that the word held a meaning of holding a relationship that was extremely close. So close, in fact, that you knew the person very well. By the 1560s, this word started to morph. It started to be defined by anyone engaging in familiar idle talk. By the 1620s, it was defined as to talk idly about the affairs of others. And by 1811, the word began to be used in the sense of trifling talk or groundless rumors. Now, when we get into this, we have a broad range of what we define this as. But by and large, what we're really concerned with, and you guys can add to this, is the idea of tale-bearing and slander. That ends up being what is the big thing. Like, the idea of slander, of not having all of the information and then talking about that and passing that on, and those people passing on this falsehood. And so you've got this tale-bearing or slander going on. So there you go. I'll kick that over to someone else.
I do think it's important to point out, too, that we've kind of, in my opinion, we have taken the word gossip and we've not used it properly. Because when we say gossip, we really mean slander.
Right.
Slander's the problem. Like, gossip is saying something, when you define the word, you define that word as it's something that's casual or unconstrained conversation or reports about other people, typically involving details that aren't confirmed as being true. It is chiefly derogatory because you're talking about people's private lives. But when we talk about it in the church, we're talking about something that is malicious in intent. I'm trying to say something about you or you that I cannot prove is true, and I'm going to spout off what I've heard or what I've seen without having confirmed it, and I'm more than likely damaging a reputation in the process of doing that. Gossip would be something simple as saying, well, I'd heard this was the case about, I heard that Matt went and did this, and it's not really proven to be true, but I heard it and I said it. But when we talk about it being such a problem, it's slander is saying, I saw Matt leaving Buffalo Wild Wings, I guess he drinks. That's slander. Like, I can't prove that that's what Matt was in there doing. I can't prove that just because someone sees someone do something that seems bad, or they hear something that seems off, I can't just go off and tell everybody I know what I've heard without doing an investigation on it, without making sure that it's true. Now, if I did do some investigation and I found out that it was true, that is what Matt was in there doing, and someone asked me, hey, what is Matt? You know, would he be a good preacher for us? I then would be kind of obligated to say, unfortunately, there's a situation we're dealing with. I'm trying to work with it. Here's what I know. Here's the facts. Facts aren't gossip. That has to be stated in the very beginning of this episode. If it is true and it is proven and it is something that I can absolutely prove without a shadow of a doubt, and I tell it for the right reasons, not just to tell everybody what I know and to show what I know about somebody, then it's never gossip to tell the truth about something that is sinful. It's always gossip and slander to say something to be cooler, to have information, to be the guy that everybody wants to spill the tea or whatever we want to call it, just so that I am more popular in my social circle.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, as you're speaking, to me, it's almost an argument over semantics in a way. Like, it doesn't really matter what we call it, whether it's true or not. To say something mean about someone else, to say something bad about someone else is, generally speaking, wrong. Like, there are exceptions to that, right? But generally speaking, if I am saying something mean about Matt, just so I can, like, if I had to take the example, if I say I saw Matt coming out of Buffalo Wild Wings and I saw him sipping on something that he shouldn't have been sipping on, right? If I'm just kind of spreading that around just to spread it around, like, that's wrong. You know, like, regardless of what my motives might be, generally speaking. But I think what you said is really important, where motives do play a huge role in that, right? Where if I'm talking to Matt about it and bring that up to Matt and I'm talking with him, and like maybe the example you brought up is a good one. Maybe in that situation I can be like, why don't you just talk to Matt about this? You know, like, just, I'm not here to, like, play middleman. I don't want to, you know, ruin anything on anybody's part, but just, you know, you might want to talk to him and just see, you know, if he's the right fit for you, type of thing. I don't know. Is that, what do y'all think about that situation?
And I think it's important to, number one, anytime that we are the middleman, there's the chance that we might cross the line, and that we have to certainly be very careful about that. And I think it's a difficult place to be in. There's no doubt, and so we have to handle that in the right way. And sometimes, you know, we've been given something or we know something specific, you know, and you know, sometimes whether true or not, the best situation is to keep our mouths shut. You know, we can always kind of go there, but there are other times, you know, again, the intent of someone, you know, the heart of the matter, the heart of an individual. If I'm out there and I'm just trying to break someone else down by building myself up because I know this information, that's absolutely sinful, and you know, needs to be. You know, we need to stay away from that. So we have a pretty good working idea, I think, you know, to kind of work within. So, you know, why is it that this idea of slander and gossip is something that God's people truly need to avoid?
Yeah, I think it goes against the very core of who we are, right? Like, the prime ethical command of God's people is love God, love people. And if that's what we're all about, like, if that's the core of what draws us to Jesus, then what we're talking about here goes against that totally. Like, we're tearing down other people, not loving them, right? We're tearing them down to love ourselves, like to make ourselves look better. But I think it really goes against, and I say this as someone who does this, right? like I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm perfect on this at all. But I think it really goes against the core of who I am called to be and who we're all called to be as God's people.
Yeah, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth. We've often taken that verse and said, so don't curse. Well, corrupt is objective. You know, it's whatever is corrupt, don't talk about it. Don't do it. Don't be involved in it. And again, you know, we point out the fact, the same guy who wrote this is the same one that said, it's been declared to me by the house of Chloe that you guys have some problems here in Corinth. So obviously there's a difference between handling sin and doing something that is for a corrupt purpose. Daniel mentioned that a moment ago. There is a difference, but if I'm going to hear something and I go, ooh, I can't wait to tell people about this, then we have a problem. If the first thought that I have when I hear something that should break my heart is, oh, I can't wait to talk about this, then I have an issue. And I know that sometimes we'll see something that will happen and it's like, did you hear? Did you see? Do you know? And even here at Polishing the Pulpit this year, there was an event that happened Wednesday night that was the scuttlebutt. I mean, everybody wanted to talk about it. And there's something that's fine with talking about that specific event because it happened, you know, it was a unique situation. But there were some things that were said that ended up not being true that even I ended up saying because I had been told that they were true until further investigation showed me that, hey, it actually didn't happen that way. And so if we're not careful, that corrupt word will proceed out of our mouth, and we may not even realize it. It may be something where we think it's so normal for me to talk about this, and I'm being corrupt in the way that I'm speaking. And I'm told to only do what's good and necessary for edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. It's also James 1:26, so if anyone thinks that you're religious and you don't bridle your tongue, you're deceiving your own heart and your religion is useless. So I can't say I'm a Christian and then refuse to bridle my tongue with things that I hear about other people. I think the biggest answer that I would give about why this is something God wants his people to avoid is because no one seems to like to investigate as much as they like to instigate. And I think that's the hugest problem. If we would investigate something if someone called me up and said, Wayne Rogers is teaching false doctrine, I would call you, we would talk. But if I needed to know for sure, I might go and watch some of your sermons. I might go and listen to some of the things that you're doing. I'm going to do my due diligence to investigate for myself. Why? That's what I should do before I come down and make a decision. But that conversation should always end with you and me talking. And if we talk and it doesn't go well, then I have a pattern for what I'm supposed to do after that. But the problem seems to be someone hears that Wayne Rogers is teaching false doctrine, and they just go and tell everybody who will listen. And they don't actually go and prove whether or not you're teaching something that's false or not. That's an issue. It's instigating instead of investigating.
Yeah, it falls into John 7:24. Judge a righteous judgment. I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't judge. Well, you're supposed to judge, but you're supposed to judge righteously. That's the point. And so going into this, I think about the aspect of God wanting us to avoid this, and think about Proverbs 22 and verse 1, where we see a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. This is a big problem. If you ruin someone's reputation, that's a big deal. I know, like recently I heard someone say that, don't worry about your reputation. No, you need to worry about your reputation. It is a big deal. You are more effective if you have a good reputation. If everybody thinks that you're an awful person for this or that reason, then you are not effective as a Christian. So if someone says something, bad about you, and it's certainly not true, which I think we've all kind of experienced to some degree, especially as preachers.
On both ends, probably.
Yeah, right. And so we've got to be careful about this ourselves, because damaging reputations is a huge deal, and it could be damaging in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, and none of us are immune to this issue, being on both sides of it. And to just kind of continue on that thought, it's much quicker to tear down a reputation than it is for someone to build it back up.
Yeah.
And we've seen that, unfortunately, in the Lord's church, how that has certainly happened among the Lord's people. Something gets out. Let's just say whether true or not for just a moment, just for argument's sake, but something gets out, and then it is like wildfire. It's just spread all over the brotherhood, and it almost becomes too difficult to even verify whether or not even the thing is true, or if it is false, and because it is kind of taken on a life of its own. And this is where gossip, that's why James warns about the tongue in James 3, because it's like, it's like a wildfire. It just spreads. And so here's a couple verses just to add, and we can continue the conversation. But 1 Timothy 5:13 says, besides they learn to as idols to wandering from house to house, not only idle but also gossips and busybodies. And so there was a warning about those individuals who would go about just going from house to house just to spread something. Mm-hmm. So we can kind of see again that intent comes out in these verses. 2 Thessalonians 3:11 is kind of the same thing. We hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but they're busybodies. So this is what they're out doing. And unfortunately, we've had that in the church, and so you can see the damage that has been caused by that. Peter says, but let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, as a busybody in other people's matters. And so sometimes things are just private and we need to shut our mouths. And so there comes a time when we just have to do that. There are other times when things are of public nature, things are doctrinally of a public nature, and, because somebody has preached that and it is out, it is public, and, we've got to deal with that differently, and that's not necessarily gossip. That's a
Right.
different beast all of itself. So how would you, how can gossip and slander damage the work, I would say, of the Lord's church? Not obviously it can split the church in many ways, but how can it really damage the work of the church?
Think about these statements that are often said. Well, everyone does it, so what's the harm in it? That's just the way a small town is. I'm not telling anything I wouldn't say to their face. Well, then go say it to their face. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to do. Make sure you don't tell this to anyone. Now, sometimes that's obviously prudent to say. There may be a situation where you don't want anyone else to know and you're calling for counsel, you're trying to get advice. But then the other one is, I don't think they would mind me telling you this. I think all of those statements are said on a weekly basis throughout the churches in this world by someone who finds out the latest thing and they want to talk about it, they want to say it, they want to promote it. And yeah, there are some things that must be discussed in private and they must be said. But God has never given a justification to spreading rumors about people. God has never given justification to saying things without investigation. And again, it all comes back to investigating. If you hear something from someone, then it is now your responsibility to find out if it's true or not. Now, if it is true, then sure, handle it. Deal with it with that person. But if I hear something about, one of my brethren, I can't just immediately start calling everyone I know and saying, all right, mark him. And we have too many people that do that.
Yeah.
They mark people for doing things, and they don't even know. I know of a situation years ago where a man wrote up a brother in the church for going and speaking at an event that he should not have been at, according to this individual. And he wrote him up, and he called him a denominationalist and all these other kind of adjectives and things. And this brother called that guy and said, hey, that's not me. There's another guy that has the same name, and that's who was there. I wasn't there. So you need to retract this. And he said, I already sent it out. He never called the guy to ask him if it was true, never checked to see if it was him. He just sent it out. And there's too many people that are doing that. And in the current day and age with social media being so readily accessible, it is so easy for me to take a Facebook post or a podcast that has been promoted and not even do my due diligence to talk to the people or listen to it myself. There was a situation a few weeks ago where there was a podcast going around. Someone called me and said, what do you know about it? I said, have you listened to it? They said, no. I said, well, you listen to it first, then you call me. I'm not going to talk about it until you've listened to it, because I'm not going to paint your view of it until you have done investigation yourself. That's the responsibility that we all have as Christians to do. After they'd listened to it, they call me back, they have questions about it still, I'll be happy to talk about it because you've listened to it. But it's my job to protect the members of the Lord's body, both from themselves and from each other. And that's the responsibility I have to say, hey, if you think there's a problem, what have you done to first look and make sure that what you're trying to find out is really worth your time to find out anyway? Because it may not be my business, it may not be something I need to be involved in doing.
Right.
And so I need to investigate. I think that if that's like the theme word of the episode, investigate, instead of instigate.
Yeah, I think that several passages that you brought up, Wayne, talked about busybodies, and I think that is a key factor here. You are spending too much time doing other stuff. I have always wondered about some of this stuff. Like, so many people that just, that's all they do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, especially I'm just personally thinking preachers. And I'm like, when do you write sermons? Like,
Never.
like, yeah,
Never.
No.
Do you spend any time in your community? Like,
Yeah, I'm like, what are you doing? It's such a sad existence, I think, to be a person that just is constantly thinking about bad stuff. And, this is, the whole point is oh, did you hear what so and so did, or did you, that's a terrible existence, and especially. Just for anybody, but especially for the Christian, who we ought to be doing stuff. We got other work to do. We've got to be out, reaching the lost and stuff. Well, you can't be doing that if you're, thinking about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
You got to be out, being benevolent to people. Well, you're probably not going to do that if you're thinking about this stuff all the time. So,
yeah, there's this tension that we live in where we have Paul talking about, I've heard this about your congregation, and checking in on it, right?
Yeah.
Like working through that. But then on the other end, you have this real life where we are all put in a place to like minister to these people. And we're put in this place to focus on the people around us, not to police everyone else that we know of, around the world. Like there's that tension where I'm definitely not Paul, but then there's maybe something to that, like checking in on each other, helping each other out from across the states and everything in the world. But to me, at least naturally speaking, I just lean more toward I'm just here. Like, I'm here to work, and I'm here to work in this community, and I'm not here to police Michael Clark from hours away. I'm not here to police Wayne or Matt or Caleb. Well, I might police Caleb, but like I'm not a sheriff,
Yeah.
I'm a minister. Like, I'm here to serve.
And there's a difference too between, like if I said something on the podcast, like I said, you know what, you don't have to go to church ever. You're fine. And you heard that on my podcast. As my brother in Christ, you would call me and say, hey, I heard something that I'm a little curious about, as to maybe give me some more context, because what you said I didn't really understand. And that's different than policing the brotherhood, because instead of you looking and listening to every little podcast of every little thing, you're only dealing with what you're involved in, because we're all in this together. And so if I hear Wayne say something, you, Matt, anyone, I might call him up and say, hey, can I get some more clarity on that? Because I didn't quite understand it. And we all would probably say, yeah, I really didn't understand it completely when I said it either, so let me say what I meant, and then I'll go back and fix it. But policing, like we're talking about, is saying, all right, I'm going to listen to every nook and cranny of this podcast, and I'm going to find something. Now, if someone came up and said, we know Jesus didn't come in the flesh, all of our ears would go, wait a minute. He had to have. The Bible teaches that he did. That's different than someone saying a Freudian slip, an accidental slip even, I should say, where someone says, Jesus is God the Father, and they really mean God the Son. Gossip would be me going around and telling everybody who will listen, oh, Matt McBrayer said Jesus is God the Father. What a heretic.
And then take that little clip and then just keep posting that everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, we see that in society all the time.
Yeah.
It certainly can slip into the church, but it ultimately it breeds that distrust. It breaks trust among friends and family and brethren and in our brotherhood. And we have to remember that we are a brotherhood in all this. So for just a couple more minutes here, but how do we guard against that? And so just take like a minute each and tell us, what are your thoughts on how we might guard against that, not just from a preacher standpoint, but from a personal standpoint.
So here's what I would say. Number one, if you start to hear gossip, or what we would really probably call slander, walk away. Walk away. You don't have to listen. You can refuse to listen. You can tell them, I'm not listening. You're sowing discord. I'm not listening. You can distance yourself from the gossiper. That sounds harsh, but you need to do that. You can rebuke them even and say, hey, would you say this if they were right here? Because it's kind of interesting that you're saying this when they're not around to defend themselves. Yeah. And the best piece of advice is what Brother Mosier said to us that he did. He had a little binder on his desk, and if people came in and they said, I got a problem with Daniel Webster, he would say, all right, and he'd open that binder and say, write down your problem, put down your name, and I'll take this to Daniel, and we can settle this. No one ever was really willing to sign that, that binder. I wonder why. Because all they were trying to do was go and stir something up. If there was a legitimate problem, they would go to Daniel. They would go to Wayne or Matt or Michael instead of going to the preacher. And we need to get into that mode again. Stop going to the preacher to try to handle these issues. Handle them amongst yourselves. That's how we're supposed to do it. If you hear something, you got a problem with somebody, fix it. If it has to go to the church, do it the biblical way. But it doesn't start with you going to church leadership and saying, here's what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think a lot of, at least my problem with, gossip when I slip into it is like, I tend to think of the person I'm gossiping about as someone who I don't fit in with, who I don't want in my group, don't want in my tribe. And I slip into this thinking where it's us versus them. instead of we're all in this together as humans, that we're all seeking after God, whether we know it or not. We're all seeking after God. We're all in this together. So when I'm putting you down, when I'm excluding you from the group, when I'm making this person that I'm talking to think different things about you, then I'm just using it to boost myself up and put you down, right? Like I'm viewing it as it's us versus them instead of, hey, I'm in this together with Matt, right? Like as annoying as Matt, no. Like I'm in this together with Matt. And it doesn't matter, you know, whether I like this person or that person, whether they get on my nerves or whatever, I'm in this together with them. And we're all working together to build each other up, to build the church up, to build God up.
Well, clearly I'm the worst person on this podcast. I've been the
I'm so glad you
illustration
finally
for
admitted it.
everything.
Guys, if you want to say something about Matt McBrayer, send it. No.
Yeah, Michael's number is that.
Also, I want to clear the air on this Buffalo Wild Wings thing. I think the appetizers are the only thing good there. I don't even. So, but anyway, going back into this, I think that the biggest thing for me, and just adding too, because all this stuff's good, is be too busy for that kind of stuff.
Amen.
Like, just like if you're getting caught up in this stuff, you're probably not busy enough. There have been times where I've been a little more, and this happens really for anything. I mean, this is any sin. Like, just be too busy for that. Like, don't, like a lot of this happens when we're being idle. And so let's be involved in the work. All of us have things, like not everybody's, preachers or anything like that. So everybody has, jobs or school or something. Well, be busy with those things and not be caught up in all this stuff.
It's like the game telephone. We've probably played it before. Hey, I'm going to whisper something to Matt, and then it's going to go all the way around to Daniel. Would be kind of dumb to play it that way. We all have mics. We can all hear each other. But that game always ends with hardly ever is the statement that was initially said the correct way when it gets to the last person. But the last thing I wanted to point out before I throw it back to you, Wayne, is there have been studies on both men and women independently to figure out how many of them gossip on a percentage basis. And women were 67%, and some people might say, duh, I totally expected that. Well, men were at 55.
I knew this was coming.
Men were at 55%, so we're not that far off from each other in the way that we gossip. And, dishing the dirt and doing all that kind of stuff, it's just not wise when we're trying to preserve the spirit of Christ. Christ called out the Pharisees, and when he called them out when they weren't around. So obviously, you can call out false doctrine. You can call out things that are sinful. But you can't do things that are just what you've heard, that are just interesting and juicy. You got to leave that stuff alone.
That's a great point. Well, appreciate the discussion, fellas, and thank you for being on here with us. Thank you for joining in to the Scattered Abroad Network, and I hope that you look forward to our next episode.